Welcome to Notorious Minds, where we examine those that have altered destiny and changed human history. After the world watched as 3 jetliners blew into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon, 1 year later, a man and his protege would terrorize the DC metro area. Join me as we revisit the month of October 20 years ago. The year is 2002, and these two changed how people went to the gas station and went shopping. They would send police departments in the DC metro area into a tailspin as men and women started dropping to the ground after being shot. No one would be able to tell where the shots were coming from or who fired the weapon that killed them. This is 23 Days of Terror, the story of the DC snipers. Warning: the following video contains violent content, graphic images, and descriptions which may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. For 23 horrific days, the DC Metropolitan area was paralyzed. A walk down a side street would be the difference between life and death. The DC snipers are not just the act of one man, but of a man and a boy. Their names are John Allen Muhammed and Lee Boyd Malvo. John Allen Muhammed was born on December 31st, 1960 in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. He was originally born John Allen Williams. His father's name was Ernest and his mother was Eva. John had 4 siblings, 2 sisters and 2 brothers. Ernest, his father, moved the family to New Orleans when his mother, Eva, was diagnosed with breast cancer. Miss Eva died in 1963 when John was just 3 years old. Needless to say, he was traumatized by his mother's death. He was bullied a lot when he was a child. After his mother's death, his father abandoned him. Clearly, John's father could not handle being a single dad to 5 children. John was mainly raised by his maternal grandfather and an aunt. But John's childhood did not get any better after that. John's relatives were brutal to him as well as his other siblings. 3 of John's siblings would go on to say that he was regularly and severely beaten as a child by several relatives, including an uncle who beat another sibling to death. For originally, John had 5 siblings instead of 4. They didn't know anything but beatings. John's sister, Bessie, would go on later to say that they were raised like animals. One time, a relative forced John to place his hand on a spark plug of a lawnmower, and then the relative pulled the cord, and it would shock the shit out of him. And they would just laugh in the yard. Edward, John's brother, said. John's sister, Erilyn Marie Williams, said, "Our life was pure hell." She said, "We just got beat. I wouldn't wish that life I had on my worst enemy. All of us were beat. We were beat with electrical cords, switches, hoses, pipes by hand." So based on John's childhood, it was horrible from the start. John graduated from Scotlandville High School at the age of 17 years of age. After high school, John got married to Carol Caglier in 1981. John Allen enlisted in the Louisiana Army National Guard at Baton Rouge as a combat engineer. They had a son named Lindbergh in 1982. John was a stern and disciplined man. At first, his military career seemed promising. He was described as personable, outgoing, funny, one of his commanders would say, but by the early 1980s, cracks began forming in him. He got in trouble twice, once for failing to report to duty, and another time for hitting an officer. Not good. He started to do a little better, but soon Carol found out that John was cheating on her. She knocked on the door of a house in the neighborhood and found that her husband was with Mildred Green. She then separated from John and took their son Lindbergh with her. Mildred met John in 1983 when they were both 23 years of age. John was illiterate, he couldn't read, and Mildred would ultimately teach him how to read. One summer, when Lindbergh was visiting John, John called his ex-wife and told her that Lindbergh was not coming back home. Clearly, John should not have influence over children, and the courts agreed. Carol ended up getting a court order in order to get her son back, and it took all the summer for her to get him back. During that time, John attempted to brainwash his son so he wouldn't want to go back home, but Carol eventually got him back. At this time, in 1987, he converted to Islam, and a few years later, he joined the Nation of Islam, headed up by Louis Farrakhan. After facing disciplinary actions from the National Guard, he then joined the U.S. Army. In the same year, he divorced Carol and moved in with Mildred. He was stationed in Washington State and later married Mildred Green. John married her in 1988. 2 years later, he was deployed to the Persian Gulf. While in the military, he was trained as a mechanic, a truck driver, and a specialist metal worker. He qualified with the Army's standard rifle, the M16, and he earned an expert rifleman's badge. This is the Army's highest of 3 levels of basic rifle marksmanship for a soldier. He was also a hand-to-hand combat expert. John's first tour was with the 15th Engineer Battalion at Fort Lewis in 1985, and in 1991 he served in the Gulf War during Operation Desert Storm with a company that dismantled Iraqi chemical warfare rockets, service for which he received the Southwest Asian Service Medal and the Kuwait Liberation Medal. In 1992, he was at Fort Ord in California with the 13th Engineers, and in 1993, he was back at Fort Lewis with the 14th Engineer Battalion. John was honorably discharged from the Army with the rank of sergeant on April 24 of 1994 after serving 16 years of service. So John left the military with all the skills he would need to be the perfect weapon, a government-trained killer. He received the following awards while in the Army: the Army Service Ribbon, the National Defense Service Medal, the Overseas Ribbon, the Non-Commissioned Officers Professional Development Ribbon, and the Army Achievement Medal. Together, John and Mildred would have 3 children, a son named John and 2 daughters named Taliba and Selena. Those who knew him felt that he was a good father. Because his father abandoned him, he always strove to be a superb dad. Mildred said John could be very charming and he was well liked. John was the life of the party around his friends. Everybody wanted to be around him. He was a funny man. They lived in Tacoma, Washington. He tried to start his own business a couple of times. The first was an auto mechanic shop and then a karate school. Mildred hired a woman by the name of Isa Nichols to be their accountant. Mildred and Isa became good friends pretty quick after that. But both of the businesses would fail. It seemed John changed once he got out of the military. Something seemed to happen to John in the military that changed his personality and how he viewed life. John and Mildred then started fighting a lot. He was abusive to her on numerous occasions. John started breaking the things Mildred liked. At one point, he ripped up her jacket. She asked him, "Why are you doing these things?" His response was, "It's a point of mind over matter." She then said, "What do you mean?" John replied, "I don't mind 'cause you don't matter." After they separated, of course, Mildred indicated that one night as she was sleeping, he used his old key to enter the house. When she woke up from her sleep, she saw John pacing back and forth in her room and just standing there staring at her. He then calmly gets up and walks out the house. I myself believe John was trying to figure out then how to get rid of her. He couldn't just kill her. He would be the prime suspect. He was mentally and verbally abusive toward her. She got a restraining order against him because of his abuse. John would be arrested on federal charges for violating a restraining order by possessing a weapon. Under federal law, those with restraining orders are prohibited from purchasing or possessing guns as part of the Lautenberg Amendment to the Gun Control Act of 1968. John loved his children very much, and shortly after the order was issued in 1988, John kidnapped his own children and took them to Antigua, West Indies in 2000. John's kids used to play video games, and they met a boy named Lee Boyd Malvo. Lee Boyd Malvo was born in Kingston, Jamaica on January 18, 1985, to Una James and Leslie Malvo. He was a good student and also played sports in school. He was a gifted artist, and he wanted to become a pilot someday. His childhood was not always a happy one. He was abused by his mother. She would physically abuse him regularly if he didn't act perfectly. She would regularly abandon him and leave him at home alone. Between the age of 7 to 13, Malvo would say that he lived in 13 different homes when his mother didn't pay the rent and they had to leave. So we can see what Lee and John had in common. They both experienced abandonment at a young age. Neither one had a father in their life growing up. So John steps into the role as Malvo's father and becomes the father he never had. Malvo would even call John Dad. John was the father figure he always wanted. Lee asked John could he live with him, and John said yes. Malvo was also like a brother to John's children. To Lee, John was everything to him. Malvo would later describe his relationship with John as being in a cult of two people. His life was very unstable, and his mother would move often when she could not pay the bills. She would often leave him alone, and he would even threaten her sometimes that he would kill himself if she left. Because he was regularly abandoned, he would seem to attach himself to any adult that showed him love. John committed credit card and immigration fraud at this time. He could get you an ID or visa for just $3,000, with Malvo as his accomplice. Una was desperate to move to the States, and her son's connection to John allowed her to do so. Una would leave her son with John. This is when their great bond started to form. While in Antigua, Malvo had some kind of illness, and John nursed him back to health. Lee would do whatever John said. John treated Lee like his own child. John was successful in brainwashing Malvo into his views of racism and religion. He would have Malvo play murderous sniper games for hours on end. He would take Malvo to poor black neighborhoods to show him how they were oppressed by white people. So by the time Malvo was killing people, he was totally desensitized. After 18 months in Antigua, authorities suspected that John is selling false ID cards. So in 2000, Muhammed rushes out of the country and back to the States before the authorities get to him. He takes his kids. He leaves Malvo behind. Muhammed returned to Bellingham, Washington. When he applied for aid in Washington State, the authorities discovered Mildred's missing children report. And John and Mildred must battle it out in court for the kids. Mildred asked her friend Isa Nichols to come with her for moral support. While John was in Antigua, Mildred was granted a no-fault divorce and awarded full custody of the children. When John went to his custody hearing against Mildred, the custody was still granted to Mildred. The judge would not hear his side of it, and John was extremely enraged. John then chased Mildred down the hall in the courthouse and said, "You have become my enemy, and as my enemy, I will kill you." This is when Mildred immediately changes her name and moves across the country. John would not allow people to see his anger, but it was boiling underneath the surface. The only thing that gave his life meaning was his children. John vowed revenge on his ex-wife, and the world would find out how far he was willing to go to do it. She then moves across the country to the nation's capital, to a Maryland suburb right out of Washington, DC. Muhammad, now alone and homeless, moved into a shelter. Seething with rage and resentment, Muhammad calls the one person that won't question his motives. He calls Lee Boyd Malvo in Antigua in October of 2001. He says, "Son, Mildred has taken the children." Upset does not even begin to describe how angry John was. He says, "Son, I need you." So Malvo packs a bag, and him and his mother, because his mother always wanted to go to the States, Una, goes to Bellingham, Washington with Malvo. When the INS found out that Una and Malvo were in the country illegally by using forged documents, they made plans to deport them. But Lee escaped the INS custody and found John at the Lighthouse Mission. Malvo and John moved into the homeless shelter together and developed a disturbing father-son relationship. Eventually, John got his own place and started training Malvo in the use of weapons. He turned Malvo into a cold-blooded assassin. John seemed to control every aspect of Malvo's life. Malvo practiced at the gun range over 10 hours a day. He told Malvo he must visualize himself killing himself. He said, "In order to become what I need you to be, you have to die. Your morals, your fears, your will." Lee Malvo has to die. On the days when John and Lee couldn't make it to the gun range, they would go over John's friend's house, Robert Holmes. They would do target practice at a tree log in Robert's backyard. They would go to the YMCA every day and lift weights, creating his own teenage killing machine, imposing an exercise program and special diet that consisted of honey and crackers once a day, to cut Malvo off from anyone who would have an influence over him. But he did make sure that Malvo went to school and listed himself as his father. John changed his name to John Allen Muhammad in October of 2001. He also taught Malvo about Islam. He exercised him rigorously. He trained Malvo to be an expert marksman. By the fall of 2002, Muhammad and Malvo had moved on from tree stumps to real-life victims. It all started way before Muhammad and Malvo would make their trip to the nation's capital. They perfected their evil craft by making targets out of the several people around the country. John Muhammad wanted revenge on his ex-wife and anyone that would help her. The first would be on February 16th of 2002 in Tacoma, Washington. Lee Boyd Malvo approached the house of Isa Nichols, a friend of his ex-wife Mildred, with a .45 caliber weapon in his hand. Her niece, Kenya Nicole Cook, was visiting her aunt with her baby daughter. Kenya answered a knock at the front door. Isa had left to go to the store. When Kenya opened the door, Lee Boyd Malvo shot her point blank in the front of her head. This was the first time he killed someone, 2 days before his 17th birthday. When Isa returned, she found her niece lying in the doorway. She grabbed her niece's hand, saying, "Hold on, baby." But unfortunately, Kenya was already dead by the time the paramedics made it there. Her 6-month-old baby girl was still sleeping peacefully upstairs. Kenya was a 21-year-old single mother. She was staying with her aunt and planning on attending culinary school. She wanted to open up her own restaurant someday. Mildred is across the country living in fear, waiting for the ball to drop. Every day she would check the locks on her doors and windows. She would check the roof every time she left home to go to work, fearing that one day her ex-husband John might find her. She believed John when he said, "I'm going to kill you and no one is going to find the body." Later, Lee Boyd Malvo from his prison cell in Virginia would tell a reporter that that was Muhammad's goal. It wasn't a matter of if he was going to kill her, but when. After Mildred flees with the children, John asks a friend to run a trace on her. He then learns that she is living near Washington, D.C. Muhammad and Malvo leave Tacoma, Washington, and are on their way to the nation's capital. As they make their way state by state, they start killing random people. They spend their days in diners and sleeping in motels. They would see someone carrying money and they would stalk them, kill them, and take what they had. As Malvo would kill each person, John would evaluate him, tell him what he was doing wrong and what he could do better, so he could be a better assassin. 1 month later, on March 19, 2002, in Tucson, Arizona, 60-year-old Jerry Taylor was on the golf course when he was shot in the chest. Malvo kills again. The first killing was a test for Malvo to make sure that he would do it. And on September 5th of 2002, in Clinton, Maryland, restaurant owner Paul J. LaRupa, who owns Margarina, a small family restaurant with his wife, only a few blocks from Mildred's house. He was carrying $3,000 and a laptop inside his briefcase. He puts his laptop on the back seat, and as he gets into his car, before he could even start it, he saw a flash of light to his left. The car window shatters. Malvo rushed up to him and shot him 6 times through the window. Malvo then stole the briefcase and ran off. Mr. LaRupa weighed his options laying there on the car seat, whether he was going to lay there and die or get up and fight for his life. He decided to fight, so he gathered all his strength and got out of that car for help. A passerby called 911. Miraculously, Mr. LaRupa survived. Muhammad said, "I created a monster. You're ready now." They viewed it like a game. Shooting random people was a game. After Mr. LaRupa was shot, he said he was extremely paranoid and anxious. He didn't know who shot him or if they were coming back. He said he could not stand to be alone. Muhammad used the money that he stole from Mr. LaRupa in order to buy a car. 5 days later, Muhammad purchased a 1990 blue Chevy Caprice at Sure Shot Auto Sales in Trenton, New Jersey. After Muhammad purchased the car, the salesman was shocked to see Muhammad open the trunk, climb in, pull the lid down over his head while he is inside. He opened the lid back up, he looked up at Malvo and said, "Yeah, this will work." Muhammad was the perfect weapon, and he trained Malvo to be it as well. He modified the Chevy Caprice into a killing machine ultimately. Ultimately, as the world would find out much later, Muhammad would drive the Chevy Caprice. Malvo would be sitting in the back seat. As they saw their victim, he would lift up the seat cushion, climb in the back of the trunk with the gun, lift up the trunk lid about an inch, stick the rifle of the gun through the hole, which had a gap of about 1 inch, and shoot from the trunk. Once they shot their victim, Malvo would then close the trunk, get back into the back seat of the car, and lower the seat cushion. The windows were tinted, so it was difficult seeing inside the car, and then they would just calmly drive away. No one would see them, and no one would see where they were shot from. Then Muhammad drives by Mildred's house. Mildred, his ex-wife, he found out her dress. Mildred would later describe an incident where her co-worker picked her up from work one day, and she said, "You know, there's a dark-colored car outside your cul-de-sac. It's just sitting there. It's making me kind of uncomfortable." So they passed by the car on their way to work, and there are 2 African-American males seated in the car. And the driver looks at Mildred, and she doesn't recognize him. But the passenger had a newspaper and held it up to shield his identity so that she couldn't see his face. So she called the police and told them, and they said, "Can you describe the car?" Mildred said, "It's a dark colored Caprice or Impala with 2 African American males seated in the car," she said. The police said, "Okay, we'll send somebody to check it out. When the police got there, the car was gone. She reveals later how close she came to dying. September 15th of 2002 in Clinton, Maryland, they shot and killed Rashid Muhammad. Then on September 21st of 2002 in Atlanta, Georgia, they shot and killed Millian Waldemariam. Then 19 hours later, after they went to a liquor store in Montgomery, Alabama, at 7 p.m., Claudine Lee Parker and Kelly Adams were leaving the liquor store. As soon as they turned around to lock the door of the store, they were shot with a revolver. Malvo then ran up and stole the contents in their purses. A police car saw him and gave chase. Malvo ran away, dropping a gun catalog along the way and throwing a revolver in the bushes. Claudine Lee Parker died immediately, and Kelly Adams survived of a gunshot to the neck. When Kelly turned her head, her face literally fell open. The bullet entered the back of her ear and went through her jaw. If the bullet had been 1/16 of an inch to the right, it most likely would have killed her. Then on September 23rd of 2002, in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Hong M. Ballinger died of a gunshot wound. Because they moved from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, they were impossible for the police to track. They were all random and in different states. After that, there were no more killings until October. During this time is when they modified the Chevy Caprice by drilling a hole in the trunk. They used a glove to lay the barrel of the gun against it so there would be no noise of metal against metal. Then they would lower the lid of the trunk down within an inch of closing and position the rifle through the gap and fire upon their victims. John Allen Muhammad has just started a chain of events that will be the largest manhunt in U.S. history, which will include state, federal, ATF, FBI, and even the White House will become involved. On October 2nd at 5:45 p.m., a cashier was working in a Michael's craft store when she saw something fly past her head. It was a high-velocity bullet. It was the first attempt as the DC snipers. The next victim would be James Martin, was 55, an amateur genealogist and a Civil War buff. He was a loving husband and father of an 11-year-old son. James was a program analyst for a federal climate agency. He worked at the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The principal at Shepherd Elementary School said that James was a generous man. He once helped the students at the school by acquiring computers for them. He was so excited about it that he hand-delivered them in his own vehicle. He didn't even have a child at the school. He just saw a need and wanted to help. He was killed on October 2nd of 2002. It's Wednesday evening and Mr. Martin goes to Shoppers Food Warehouse at 6:04 p.m. in Wheaton, Maryland. Across from the Glenmont Police Department on Randolph Road, James Martin gets out of his vehicle with his recyclable shopping bags in hand. He walks through Glenmont Shopping Center toward the Shoppers Food Warehouse, when suddenly other shoppers standing by their cars see him instantaneously fall to the ground. Witnesses say they heard a bang, not a pop like a regular handgun. The bullet entered his back, severed his spinal cord, and destroyed his organs. Investigators checked the nearby security footage later, which supports witness accounts that the shooter is nowhere in sight. The surveillance tape did not show a bullet plume or muzzle flash. Blood pools around him, and he is the first in a series of shootings that will paralyze the DC metro area. This case is extremely special to yours truly because I am a native of Maryland and has shopped at that Shoppers many times, for at that time I only lived 2 blocks away from where Mr. Martin lost his life. My children went to a school a block from where Mr. Martin fell. So I know firsthand the terror that the DC snipers inflicted on the metro area. This area in Maryland at this time rarely saw homicides. Montgomery County, for many years, was ranked in the top 10 among the richest counties in the United States. The next morning, James Sonny Buchanan was known as a man with a big heart. He was always ready to help others. The 39-year-old son of a retired Montgomery County, Maryland police officer was an active volunteer at the local Boys and Girls Club. He was an amateur poet and taught children how to garden. Sonny was the dad to literally 400 kids, said his friend Gregory Wims, and fellow volunteer at the Boys and Girls Club. He came to the club 2 to 3 times a week and helped children with their homework. He was killed on Thursday morning, October the 3rd, at 7:41 a.m. in Rockville, Maryland, at the height of rush hour traffic. He previously owned a landscaping business for his family. He would mow his old clients' grass as a way of thanking them for their many years of service. He was going up a hill, cutting the grass outside Fitzgerald Auto Mall, which is right off of Rockville Pike, when he was shot. He immediately grabbed his chest as the mower continued without him. As he ran to the entrance of the auto mall, he collapsed in the parking lot. Those passing by called 911. The 2 people he ran to thought he was injured by the lawnmower. When the paramedics arrived, they knew it was not a lawnmower accident. He had been shot. When he arrived at the hospital, the personnel were surprised to see the small entrance wound in the front of his body, but the large exit wound at the back of his body. He made it to the hospital, but soon after passed away from massive blood loss. The doctor said that his heart had no blood in it. All of it had drained out. Rockville Pike, one of the most busiest stretches of road in the affluent area of Rockville, Maryland, in Montgomery County, with miles and miles of shopping centers, restaurants, and business centers, with easy access to I-495, the capital Beltway, only a mile away. The snipers had a quick exit after the attack. The police would not have enough time to react to this crime scene when they would be called away to another one 30 minutes later. Kamar Walakar, 54, was killed that same morning at 8:12 a.m. in Albany, Maryland, just getting ready for his day of picking up passengers since he was a taxi driver, while filling up his tank at a mobile gas station when he was shot in the chest. Mr. Walakar yelled out in anguish for someone to call for help. A lady near his car noticed that she had blood smeared on the side of her van. When she looked up, she saw Mr. Walakar fall right in front of her. As she called for help, the 911 operator could barely understand her because of her distress. A doctor that was at the gas station tried to revive Mr. Walakar, but it was no use. EMT arrived, but had no response, for Mr. Walakar was dead. The bullet ripped through his heart and lungs, and he died within minutes of being shot. It was his 25th wedding anniversary that day. Andrew, Mr. Walakar's son, said about his father that he was the greatest person I ever met, and I'm glad that he was my father. Ordinarily, the part-time cab driver, Mr. Walakar, from Albany, Maryland, would not have been at that gas station that day, but he was trying to finish his runs early so he could enjoy his day, seeing that it was his anniversary. Mr. Walakar was born in India, and he had intended to retire there. Then, 20 minutes later, Sarah Ramos, at 8:37 a.m., would be next, just a few miles away, at Leisure World Shopping Center, which is adjacent to Leisure World Senior Community. She was sitting reading on a bench at the shopping center. Those passing by thought she had shot herself. They thought she had committed suicide, but she was just waiting for a boss to pick her up for work when the snipers attacked. A native of El Salvador, Miss Ramos was a member of several church groups and babysat for children and worked as a housekeeper. Her employer, Larry Graffigan, said that when she would enter a room, the whole atmosphere would change because of her loving nature. Ms. Ramos was married and had a 7-year-old son. The snipers were sitting next to the Leisure World Shopping Center sign when they shot her. The bullet went through her head and into the store window. It was by the grace of God that no one else was injured. She was only 34, and 50 minutes later, evil struck again. Minimal evidence was left at the scene of the shootings. The police seemed to always be one step behind this elusive killer. It was like chasing a ghost. Then there was Laurie A. Lewis Rivera, only 25 years old, 25, was shot in the back and killed while she was vacuuming out her car at a Shell gas station on the same day at 9:58 a.m. People walking by thought they heard a tire blow and found her lying in her own blood. By the time she arrived at the same hospital as James Sonny Buchanan, she would be dead from massive blood loss. Veteran Police Chief Charles Moose had seen a lot of things in his career, but nothing like this. This kind of thing just didn't happen in Montgomery County. Standing in front of the press, Chief Moose said, "Our murder rate just increased by 25% in one day. There are no connections to the victims. All seem to be just random. The snipers were just picking a location, and whoever walked into their line of sight was the next victim." 3 of the 5 were shot in the back and the others in the neck or the head. Stores started closing as a result. As a result of the mayhem, public finding out about the murders, parking lots would eventually go empty. Sporting events would be canceled. Children could not play outside. When people found out victims were shot at gas stations, you had to jump out of your car and continuously move around so you weren't an easy target. I myself had a toddler at the time, and I would get out of my car, put the pump in the gas tank, jump back into my car, and lay down in the back seat cradling my toddler. It was insane the things you had to do to stay safe. When you walked down the street, you would have to walk in a zigzag line in order to not be an easy target. Most of the time, people just ran to wherever they were going. Authorities had no idea where it would happen next. The snipers viewed this as a game. They were shooting people like they were shooting that tree log. As a result of 5 murders in one day, Montgomery County Police Chief Charles Moose would hold a press conference and warn the public that a sniper was on the loose, and to stay calm. Everything was being done to apprehend the murderer. A witness at the Leisure World Shopping Center said he saw a white van speed away from the shooting at the time that Ms. Ramos was shot. So police believe that the sniper might be driving a white van, but the witness would be wrong, which would lead the police in the wrong direction. White vans all over would be pulled over regularly and searched. Later that same evening, Pascal Charlot, 72, was killed at 9:20 p.m. in Washington, D.C. They had crossed the D.C. line. He was a retired carpenter, and he would go for walks when it was nice outside. He was crossing Georgia Avenue in the District of Columbia when he fell to the ground. Witnesses called the police. He died within an hour. A witness said they saw a blue Chevy Caprice near the scene of the shootings. A Prince George's County police officer saw a car on I-495 matching the description of the Caprice with New Jersey tags. He ran a check, but since it did not come back stolen, he let the car continue on as it entered Virginia. The ATF confirmed the next day that all the shootings had been done by the same weapon. This one day sent the metro area into a panic. No one could tell from what direction the shots were coming from or who might have shot them. 5 people dead in less than 16 hours. But witnesses to the horror did remember seeing a blue Chevy Caprice in the area, but it did not look suspicious because it calmly left the area. But the Chevy was pulled over by the police after running 2 stop signs. But Muhammed had a valid driver's license and registration, and he was very respectful, undoubtedly from his time in the military. So police let him go. There were numerous shell casings at the scenes, so they were able to determine what kind of weapon it was pretty fast, and that the same gun was used in all 5 murder scenes. The kind of gun that was used was a Bushmaster .223 caliber long-range rifle. All the victims were autopsied at the same time at the University of Maryland in Baltimore. Police needed info, and they needed it fast before more people died. The autopsy determined that the snipers used hollow point bullets that expanded when they entered the body, which caused much more damage than a regular bullet. These bullets meant that the assailants meant to kill their victims, where thousands of calls were coming in daily with alleged info on the snipers. At first, John just started out wanting to murder his ex-wife and get the kids back, but John's racist and religious views came into play. John would tell Lee, "We're going to make everyone pay for everything this country has done. We're going to terrorize it." John turns to Lee and says, "We're going to punish these mother." As the DC sniper moved locations and got on the highway heading through the state of Virginia, on Friday afternoon at a Michael's craft store in Fredericksburg, Virginia, Carol Sewell, 43, a survivor, on October the 4th at 2:30 p.m. while she was loading crafts into her car from Michael's craft store in the Spotsylvania shopping center, a bullet tore through her back and abdomen into her van. Police arrived quickly. Surveillance camera would capture a blue Chevy Caprice. The bullet tore through her back and abdomen and into the van. She said, "God, please don't let me die." Clearly, God hurt her. Police arrived quickly and looked at the surveillance cameras, and it captured a blue Chevy Caprice in the area. The FBI and the ATF were there to process everything. The bullet was a match to all the other sniper victims. The sniper was now hunting in new territory, since Spotsylvania is too far to be considered part of the DC metro area. When the sniper attacks crossed into Virginia, 50 FBI agents joined the 100 Montgomery County officers in order to work on the case. The sniper attacks were now making national news. The whole country was watching Washington DC. The sniper attacks made Montgomery County infamous, and Chief Charles Moose a reluctant celebrity. Chief Moose and Mayor Duncan of Montgomery County agreed that it was safe for the kids and that they could keep the schools open. No one would ever imagine that the sniper would be even more diabolical when they parked near Benjamin Tasker Middle School in Bowie, Maryland, right next to Montgomery County. Bright and early on Monday morning, as students are being dropped off at the school, Malvo wrote on a tarot card, "Call me God. For you, Mr. Policeman, do not release to the press." The card was then placed in a plastic bag and attached to a tree. As they lay on the ground in the woods across from the school, Iron Brown, 13, was being dropped off to the school by his aunt. It's October 7th of 2002 at 8:09 a.m. As he walks up to his school, the bullet from the Bushmaster .223 hits Iran in the chest, and he falls to the ground. But Iran, being a strong boy, is able to get back up. He takes a few more steps and collapses again. His aunt is still sitting in the parking lot and looks through her rearview mirror and sees him lying on the ground. She races over to him. She helps him get into her car. Had it been anyone else, Iran probably would have died. But Iran's aunt did not panic as most would, seeing the blood pour out of her nephew's chest. Because she is a seasoned trauma nurse, she picks up her cell phone and calls the nearest hospital. She says to the hospital staff, "I have a teenage boy with a gunshot wound to the chest." Speeding through busy Bowie streets, she makes it to the parking lot of the hospital, where the hospital staff rush him into the emergency room, and they are able to stabilize him. But the hospital that Iran is at is not equipped for the kind of procedure that he needs, so he's transported to a hospital in Washington, DC, where the doctors there save his life. Chief Moose did a superb job of heading up the investigation, but he was visibly shaken by the shooting of a child, as well as we all were. The interview that day revealed everyone's outrage as a single tear drips down the chief's face. His disgust at the shooting of a kid
is so mean-spirited that they shot a child. Now, all of our victims have been innocent, have been defenseless, but now we're stepping over the line because our children don't deserve this. So parents, please Do your job tonight. Engage your children. Be there for them. We're going to need it. We're going to need you to support them. But stepping over the line, shooting a kid, I guess it's getting to be really, really personal now. So if there's any doubt out there what law enforcement is going to be engaged in, what we're going to be doing, then you can remove all doubt.
It's one thing to go after an adult, but it's truly heartless to shoot a child. Clearly, the snipers have no conscience. The police then send the police cadets out for a forensic walk to search the woods across from where Aaron was shot. When investigators search the area where they think the shot came from, using a metal rake, they find the bullet casing. They also find a tarot card of death, and the tarot card has a message written on it. For you, Mr. Policeman, code, call me God. Do not release to the press. It was like a calling card saying that it's us again and we did it. Chief Moose decided not to release the information about the tarot card, but somehow the news media gets a hold of the information and is splattered across the Washington Post. Chief Moose reveals his frustration at the media. The police wanted to establish communication, but the media deterred that, which slows down the investigation. The President of the United States then sent FBI agent Gary Ball to help in the investigation. There is a unit in the FBI called the Rapid Response Unit. It is deployed in emergency situations to set up a command center. Agent Ball called out the Rapid Response Unit and immediately set up a fully operational sniper command center. The joining of federal and state authorities meant there were 400 agents as well as officers that worked around the clock. The FBI put up a $200,000 reward for the capture of the DC snipers. It doubled in one day after Iran, the teenage boy, was shot. 2 days after Iran was shot, victim number 9, on Wednesday evening as Dean Harold Myers, 53, on October the 9th, it's 8:15 p.m. Mr. Myers is a civil engineer who was a decorated Vietnam veteran. He just stopped to get gas at a Sunoco gas station because he had a long drive home back to Gaithersburg, Maryland from Manassas, Virginia. He got out of his car and he was pumping his gas as a .223 caliber bullet ripped through his skull, killing him instantly. The blue Chevy Caprice was parked in a lot across the street. Muhammad was even interviewed in the parking lot but was not detained. This was making national news. The world was watching what was going on in DC. No one at this time felt safe. No one wanted to go to the store or even to the gas station. Then the authorities noticed a pattern with the snipers. They were killing people close to the entrances of interstate highways, which made for quick exits. 2 days later, while a police officer was standing 50 yards away, on October 11th at 9:40 a.m., Kenneth Bridges, 53, a Philadelphia, Pennsylvania businessman, was killed as he filled up his gas tank at an Exxon gas station on I-95 near Fredericksburg, Virginia. The co-founder of a marketing distribution company, he was in the area on a business trip. He was a loving husband and father of 6 children. After that, some gas stations would erect tarps coverings over the gas pumps where people could pump their gas as a way of protecting customers. The police advised the public to avoid wooded areas and to shop and go to places that had coverings. But the sniper still was able to terrorize the community. The next Monday, on October the 14th, at 9:19 p.m., it was the Columbus holiday of the following week. Ted and Linda Franklin were at a Home Depot buying shelves. Linda Franklin, 47, was an FBI analyst. They were at the Seven Corners Mall in Falls Church, Virginia. From across the street, Malvo positioned himself to shoot Ted, but Ted moved around the car to adjust the seat to put in the shelves, trying to load the shelves into the car. Then at the last minute, Malvo changed his mind and pointed the Bushmaster rifle at Linda's head because she was standing still. because she was standing still watching her husband. He shot her in the head. The sniper's 11th victim, a husband, had to watch as his wife's head was blown apart. The right side of Linda's head was blown completely off. Can you imagine the horror as Ted calls 911 for help? One detective said later that she will never forget Linda's husband's voice when she had to listen to his 911 tape. The blue Caprice drove away before the police even got to the scene of the crime. Malvo was sitting approximately this far off when he shot Linda. A witness named Matthew Dowdy said he saw the killer, a Middle Eastern man, crouching down taking a shot. He described a white or cream-colored van with a burnt-out rear light. Chief Moose sent out an alert to the public. After an investigator reviewed the Salem safes from the hardware store at 9:21 p.m., Mr. Dowdy appeared on the screen 3 minutes after the shooting had taken place. The witness had lied. It was a hoax. He just wanted his 15 minutes of fame. After killing Linda Franklin, they were not killed for 5 days. The snipers tried to contact the police several times, but were lost in the thousands of calls coming in to the command center.
Good morning. Don't say anything, just listen. Where's the people that are causing the killing in your area? Look on the terror card. It says, "Call me God. Do not release the press." We have called you 3 times before, trying to set up negotiations. We've got no response. People have died.
Sir, any information at Montgomery County Police Hotline. We're not investigating the crime. Do you like the number?
Then a lead came from Tacoma, Washington, on the other side of the country. As Robert Holmes watched the coverage of the DC sniper shootings, he realized in the pit of his stomach that his friend John Muhammed might be behind these attacks. John Muhammed and Robert were buddies in the Army, and Robert knew that John owned a long-range rifle just like the one shown on the news reports. But on top of that, John had an estranged wife who had taken custody of their children and moved to the DC area. So he calls the tip line, and his tip gets completely lost in the thousands of calls. 5 stress-filled days had passed without a shooting. The sniper then got desperate for law enforcement to accept that they were the killers when they called, and so they brought up the shootings in Montgomery, Alabama. Big mistake. They told investigators to look into the shootings. Montgomery County called the Montgomery, Alabama police and asked if anyone handled a shooting at an ABC liquor store, and the police said yes. We had a robbery homicide at that liquor store, but the gun used was not a Bushmaster, and the DC sniper didn't rob his victims. Police determined that there wasn't a connection. Then on Saturday, October 19th, at 8:00 p.m. in Ashland, Virginia, Jeffrey Hopper, 37, and his wife Stephanie were on their way home to Melbourne, Florida, when they decided to stop for dinner. Since they were 150 miles south of the DC area, they thought that they were safe. They would be wrong. As they walked out of the Ponderosa Steakhouse, they heard a gunshot. It took Jeff a minute to realize that he was shot in the upper abdomen. The bullet tore through several organs. As he dropped to the ground, Stephanie, his wife, frantically tried to unlock her cell phone in order to call 911. It would ultimately take 5 operations and about a half a month in the hospital, but Jeff would survive. His surgeon removed part of his stomach, the left half of his pancreas, and his entire spleen. But Jeff would survive. He became one of the rare few that did. Muhammad and Malvo laid in the grass across from the Ponderosa Steakhouse. After the assault, later in the woods near the restaurant, an ATF dog found a bullet casing. The snipers tacked a handwritten note to a tree. Again, the note was inside a Ziploc bag. Malvo left DNA on the bag. Unfortunately, his DNA was not in the national database, so they had nothing to match it to. The sniper wrote that at 6 a.m. he would call the restaurant where Jeffrey Hopper had been shot. but the police missed the cutoff because the letter wasn't opened until after that time. So Chief Moose went to the press with a very specific communication. Following the discovery of the note, he asked the DC sniper to call at the number that Malvo provided. On the morning of October the 21st, the call came. Finally, the police and the sniper were in direct contact with each other. The voice on the phone said to follow the directions in the note or more people would die. They were to tell the press that the sniper had been caught like a duck in a noose. Police were dumbfounded, having no idea what they meant by that. The call ended with a frightful warning. P.S. Your children are not safe anywhere at any time. The call was tracked to a gas station, but the snipers were gone. The note on the tree demanded $10 million to be put in an account. The sniper's note mentioned the Montgomery, Alabama shooting once again. A second call was called to Montgomery, Alabama police, and they revealed more information about a catalog that had been dropped at the scene of the crime. It had a fingerprint on it, but local officials said they had not processed the fingerprint. The catalog was immediately flown to Washington DC, and lo and behold, the fingerprint matched Lee Boyd Malvo. It was a match to an INS fingerprint on file. When Malvo first got to the United States, he went to the INS in Bellingham, Washington, with his forged documents. He had to give the government a name of someone he was connected to in the United States. And of course, Lee put on the application John Muhammad's name. This is the first time that they are finally linked together. Now they have a face and a fingerprint, and they know that the DC sniper has an accomplice. Now the police know that they cannot allow this information to leak out to the press. For if the information gets out, Muhammad and Malvo will be in the wind and they will never catch them. When the snipers put in the note that the children were not safe anywhere at any time, Chief Moose knew that he had to go to the press and let the world know. He told the public to be vigilant, that the snipers said that your children are not safe anywhere at any time. It was the hardest thing he ever had to say. Just when police are right on the sniper's trail, they strike again in the heart of Montgomery County. 3 days after, Mr. Hopper was shot at the Ponderosa on Tuesday, October 22nd at 5:55 a.m. on Aspen Hill Road. Conrad Johnson, 35, was a father of two. He loved basketball. He lived in Oxon Hill, Maryland, in neighboring Prince George's County. At a ride-on bus stop, he was a bus driver for Montgomery County and had worked for the county for approximately 10 years. Conrad was waiting to leave to run his route. A note was left near the scene. As he was exiting the bus, he received a single gunshot to the chest standing on the top step of the bus. Once he was shot, he staggered back into the bus and collapsed on the floor. A woman coming to ride the bus discovered his body. In fear, she stayed with Conrad until the police arrived. He was rushed to the hospital. The bullet has destroyed his liver. They took him into surgery. Unfortunately, Conrad only lived about an hour, and then his mother was told that her son was dead. He was just working to take care of his family, and he died for it. His mother describes him as a gentle giant. Conrad used to get off the bus for an elderly passenger, walk up to her house, and then escort her back to his bus every single morning. He would say to the elderly passenger, "Sniper has to get through me before they can get to you." That's the kind of man he was, and that's the kind of man they killed. This would be the last killing that the DC sniper would commit. Thank God a friend of Muhammad chose to do the right thing. After agents examined the fingerprint from Montgomery, Alabama crime scene, in Tacoma, Washington, the FBI finally contacted John's friend Robert Holmes. After hearing Mr. Holmes' recording on the tip line, the FBI agents played the tapes for Mr. Holmes, and immediately Mr. Holmes recognized Malvo's voice, a kid who hung out with Muhammad. John and Robert would confide in each other. Robert had called the tip line 5 days earlier but failed to get through. He also gave the agents a possible motive. He knew that John Muhammad was devastated when he lost his kids to Mildred. John also threatened to kill his ex-wife, so she moved to Washington DC area with her children. Robert Holmes said later he was compelled to do the right thing. He said he would turn in his own brother if he was murdering people. And he and John were as close as brothers when they were in the military together. Robert Holmes led the agents to a tree stump in his backyard that Malvo and Muhammad used to use as target practice, and that Muhammad nicknamed Malvo Sniper. The National Car Database also revealed to the police that Muhammad owned a blue Chevy Caprice. Back in Maryland, the task force was closing in on the DC snipers. They discovered that John Muhammad had a blue Chevy Caprice registered to him out of New Jersey. The press are following the authorities every step of the way, broadcasting everything they discover, which could hinder the investigation if the snipers are watching. At one point in the investigation, reporters were getting info before the police. The press even named the sniper before the police. Police confirmation of the sniper came 1 hour after the media reported it. On October 23rd of 2002, the DC Task Force released the license plate number of the Chevy Caprice to the public, as well as the description of Malvo and Muhammad. Police were hoping that Malvo and Muhammad were not watching the TV that night. Then Whitney Donahue, who repaired industrial refrigerators and had been working late on October the 24th in Virginia, at about 11:30 p.m., he decided to go home. He started out on Route 66 home. He had a 2-hour drive, so he turned on the radio and heard authorities say, "We are looking for a blue Chevy Caprice, New Jersey tags NDA 217. Whitney, who had previously owned a Chevy Caprice, so he knew exactly what he was looking for. He started scanning the cars as he got on Route 70 and decided to stop at a rest area on South Mountain Road, and as he turned in, he saw a dark blue Chevy Caprice. As he drove past the front of the car, he could see the license plate, and it said NDA 217, and he realized he was sitting across from the DC snipers. So he picked up his cell phone and called 911. He nervously waited for the police to arrive. Maryland State Police blocked off the entrance and exit to the rest area. The hostage and rescue team was dispatched to the location. The federal hostage and rescue team is rarely used, but was selected for this operation. And not again. At 3:19 a.m. on October 24th of 2002, they approached the blue Chevy Caprice. 100 officers surrounded the car. Police breached the car from the back seat since the doors were locked. They smashed out the windows of the blue Chevy Caprice and took the sleeping suspects by gunpoint. The Bushmaster rifle was behind them in the back seat, with the safety off, ready to be fired. So undoubtedly, had one of them been awake, it would have been a bloodbath. They were pulled out and separated on the curb. You could hear Malvo say, "It's my fault. I fell asleep." 3 weeks of shootings were over because of one brave man on his way home from work. Muhammad and Malvo were arrested at 3:30 a.m. on October 24th of 2002. In the car were several bottles of vitamins to sustain them while they were killing, and Muhammad's civilian version of the Army assault rifle was attached underneath the back seat. They also had a map where they indicated people that they had murdered as well as future murders. At the time of the killings, John was 41 and his cohort, Lee, was 17. Had Lee been 1 year older, he would most undoubtedly have gotten the death penalty. At the time of their arrest, Malvo was sweating bullets, and Muhammad had the look of pure rage on his face. For several days, Lee Malvo remained silent. Then Detective June Boyle got him to talk by offering him something to eat. They got him 2 veggie burgers. Once he started eating and he started talking, everything just flowed pretty well from there. Malvo told her that he would fast before killing because it improved his aim. He just kept bragging about how they had planned to do 5 killings in one day, he said, because he knew the police couldn't handle it. He gave details of each killing, but in the Franklin shooting, he said that he aimed at Ted Franklin first, but he moved to the back of the car. He said it only took him 2 seconds, and he locked on to Linda Franklin and shot her in the head. Malvo pointed to his head and laughed about it and said it was a great shot. Investigators believe the killing spree was a twisted plot by John Muhammed to kill his ex-wife and to get his children. At the end, it was between 24 and 26 shootings throughout the nation that they were involved in.
The search of the vehicle today yielded a weapon, which is a Bushmaster XM-15 .223 caliber rifle, which was sent to the ATF lab in Rockville for analysis. The results of forensic testing are that the weapon seized from the vehicle occupied by Muhammad has been forensically determined to be the murder weapon in the shootings. Residents of Montgomery County, the Washington region, and indeed our entire nation, with profound thanks and deep appreciation to Montgomery County Police Chief Charles Moose, ATF Special Agent in Charge Mike Bouchard, FBI Special Agent in Charge Gary Long.
Both men pleaded not guilty and faced years of litigation for their multi-jurisdictional crime spree. The trial of John Allen Muhammad began in Prince William County, Virginia, for his crimes in October of 2003. For the murder of Dean Harold Myers, in November of that same year, he was found guilty of capital murder. 4 months later, he was sentenced to death. While awaiting execution in Virginia in August of 2005, he was extradited to Maryland to face charges. He was convicted of 6 counts of first-degree murder in Maryland on May 30th of 2006. All appeals of his conviction for killing Dean Harold Myers was rejected. Police were never able to prove that Muhammad had pulled the trigger in any of the 23 shootings. He was prosecuted with what was called the Triggerman statute, that states that if a suspect was a direct helper or causing agent for the shootings, he should be held responsible for them. It was said during his trial that John suffered neurological damage due to the chemicals in the Gulf War, for he dismantled Iraqi chemical warfare rockets. Muhammad was examined by a psychologist during his trial, but they were never entered into evidence in the court trial, so the world would never truly know why he did what he did. Lee Boyd Malvo was then brought to trial in 2003 in Virginia for the murder of Linda Franklin at the Home Depot. Dewey Cornell was Malvo's psychologist. He would spend many hours trying to understand him. He was a very unhappy child, being severely disciplined if he was not perfect. He was the perfect storm of abused mother, no father, and easily manipulated. The attorneys in the Lee Boyd Malvo trial said that John Allen Muhammad's goal for the DC sniper attacks was to kill Mildred, his ex-wife, in order to regain custody of his 3 children. I believe he had Malvo do the killing so he could say that he was an innocent man and never killed anyone. Because Malvo was a minor, he did not face the death penalty. Malvo would eventually reverse his plea later to guilty. He would also surprisingly testify against John Allen Muhammad in his trial. Lee Boyd Malvo testified that Muhammad indoctrinated him into believing that the proceeds of the extortion attempt would be used to establish a camp in Canada where homeless children would be trained as terrorists. Muhammad had remained silent except for a rare few days at his trial when he chose to defend himself. Muhammad attempted to represent himself for 2 days during his trial, but his lawyers told the judge that he suffered from brain damage, arguing he was not fit to make legal decisions for himself. John was found guilty of capital murder for Dean Harold Myers in March of 2004 and was sentenced to death by a lethal injection. Malvo is now serving 10 consecutive life sentences without parole in Red Onion State Prison in Virginia. Before his execution, he visited with his eldest son, Lindbergh. Muhammad's last words to his eldest son Limber, which he said to his son, was, "Be strong, black man." He then turned from his son and was escorted to his cell. John Allen Muhammad stepped foot into Virginia's death chamber, and within seconds he was lying on a gurney, tapping his left foot, his arms spread wide with a needle dug into each. "Mr. Muhammad, do you have any last words?" the warden asked the mastermind behind the Washington area sniper attacks that killed more than 10 in 2002. Muhammad, calm and stoic, was defiant to the end, refusing to utter any final words. Even at his death, he expressed his righteous indignation for his own execution. The 48-year-old died by lethal injection at 9:11 p.m. on Tuesday, November 10, 2009, at Greenville Correctional Center under the watch of relatives of the victims of the killing in the Washington area for 23 days of terror. The lawyers of the family of John Allen Muhammad would like to make the following statements. The execution of John Allen Muhammad will raise a lot of different feelings to the families devastated by the tragic shootings of September and October of 2002, and for the broader community affected by those crimes. We deeply sympathize with the families and loved ones who have to relive the pain and the loss of those terrible days. This also extends to the children of John Muhammad, who with humility and self-consciousness lost a father, a member of their family. All those families and the countless citizens across the country who bore witness and continue to do so to those tragic events, we renew our condolences and we offer our prayers for a better future. Shortly after the trial, the families and the community in Montgomery County set up a memorial for the fallen victims of the DC sniper attacks. So if you're ever in Wheaton, Maryland, go visit Brookside Gardens. There you will find the stones of all the DC sniper victims engraved there. It's such a beautiful place to remember the fallen. In the end, they almost accomplished a near-perfect crime spree, had it not been for them wanting recognition for it like most serial killers. They could have possibly gotten away with it. John Allen Muhammad and Lee Boyd Malvo are two heads of the same coin. Both did not grow up with their fathers, both experienced being abandoned, and both were abused at a young age. I do not believe Lee Boyd Malvo was brainwashed, but it was something that he chose. I believe he wanted to please John so much that he was willing to do whatever it took. In my opinion, both are desperately wicked individuals. John was also a truly conniving and manipulative individual with no conscience. He even tried to manipulate his eldest son so he would not want to go back to live with his mother. He strategically had Lee write the letters, wield the gun, and make the phone calls. John was just there to make sure he guided Lee through it, so that he could always say that it was not me. Until the day he died, he always called himself an innocent black man. I believe when his wife left him of his father's abandonment, his children was the only thing he had left, and when his children were taken away, he in essence lost who he was, a good father unlike his biological father. Coupled with his PTSD and the neurological problems he received from Project Desert Storm, I believe that it drove John Allen Muhammad mad. Fuming with rage and revenge, he would do whatever it took to get his children back. Unfortunately, a host of others would pay the price for his rage. John Allen Muhammad's wife Mildred would later say in interviews with the police that he returned home from the military as a different man. Whatever Muhammad experienced changed the man he used to be. She said it started with verbal, then mental, then physical abuse. He came home an extremely angry and enraged individual. After John's arrest, authorities also claimed that Muhammad admitted that he admired and modeled himself after Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda and approved of the September 11 attacks. Muhammad would never admit to his crimes. He always viewed himself, until the day he died, as innocent. He also told his lawyers to withdraw any further appeals. He seemed to resign himself to the fact that he was going to die. The Nation of Islam leader Louis Farrakhan would publicly distance himself and his organization from Muhammad's crimes. Muhammad has been a manipulator from even before he entered the military. And had he been able to see his children like he wanted, he probably would have turned them into hating individuals as well. Look what he did to Lee Boyd Malvo. Unfortunately, he led Malvo to a reality he can never return from. Malvo was angry as well for his upbringing, but I believe John helped him cross that line into total wickedness, and to push him to the point where he had no regard for human life. Even though Malvo was convicted of capital murder in Virginia and sentenced to life in prison without parole, in 2002, however, a series of Supreme Court rulings and a change in Virginia law gave Malvo the opportunity to seek parole after serving 20 years in custody. Because the High Court, they said it was not right to sentence a minor to life without parole. The Virginia Parole Board rejected his request on August 30th, finding that Malvo remains a risk to the community and should serve more of his sentence before being released on parole. I believe he shouldn't be released. Like any other terrorist, he should pay with his life just like he took life. I believe Lee Boyd Malvo deserves to stay in prison. He is very matter of fact. If you listen to his testimony about his crimes, he talks about it like he's talking about cooking a piece of chicken. He has no sense of remorse and he sounds very arrogant and unfeeling. I believe given the opportunity, if John had ever gotten hold of his ex-wife, he would have indeed killed her. And in that way, he would have never been a suspect in her death, because she would have been just another victim of the snipers. Thank God he was captured before he could complete his diabolical plan and murder her. My deepest condolences to all those that lost their lives in October of 2002 and earlier. I pray that all their loved ones will find the peace that they need. Thank you for watching. This is Notorious Minds. Please like, share, and by all means subscribe to this channel. And please click the notification bell so that you will be notified the next time I upload a future video. Take care of yourselves, be safe out there. Until next time.